The ballroom was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and hushed, expensive whispers. Madelyn clutched her small purse, the beaded fabric digging into her damp palm. On stage, her husband Brendan, the celebrated founder of the tech giant, Innovate, was bathed in a brilliant white spotlight, accepting the Entrepreneur of the Year award. He was handsome, charismatic a god, in a tailored suit. Then he looked directly at her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "And I have to thank my wife," he said, the microphone amplifying his voice to a bone-shaking rumble. "She's been my biggest supporter, and my biggest project. As you can all see, we're expecting. I just hope the baby inherits her heart, and my everything else." The silence was deafening before it was shattered by a wave of shocked, uncomfortable laughter. In that moment, under the weight of 1,000 stares, Madelyn's world didn't just crack. It was pulverized into dust. The evening had started with a lie, as most evenings with Brendan did. He had told her she looked beautiful. He'd said it while his eyes scanned her form, with the detached appraisal of a livestock judge. The dress, a deep emerald silk, had been expensive, but it couldn't hide the reality of her 7-month pregnancy. Her ankles were swollen, her face was fuller, and a web of faint stretch marks was beginning to appear on her belly, a private map of the new life she was creating. She felt less like a glowing mother-to-be and more like an overstuffed sausage in a silk casing. Brendan, on the other hand, was perfection. His dark hair was expertly styled, his tuxedo fit like a second skin, and his smile could charm a snake out of its basket. He was the golden boy of the San Francisco tech scene. His company Innovate had developed a revolutionary data compression algorithm that was making major corporations salivate. Tonight's gala, hosted by the Bay Area Business Council, was his coronation. As they navigated the crowded ballroom, Madelyn felt a familiar gnawing anxiety. The women were impossibly thin, their laughter like the tinkling of ice in crystal glasses. The men were sharp, their suits radiating power. And she was pregnant. In this world of sleek, optimized perfection, her changing body felt like a glitch in the system. Brendan guided her through the room, his hand on the small of her back, a gesture that looked possessive and proud to outsiders, but felt to her like a warden guiding a prisoner. Brendan, darling. A woman with a surgically frozen smile and a diamond necklace that could fund a small country, air-kissed him. Congratulations, and look at you, Madelyn. Positively, blooming. The word hung in the air, a polite euphemism for enormous. Madelyn forced a smile. Thank you, Marissa. We're very excited. Of course you are, Marissa cooed, her eyes flicking back to Brendan. You've certainly landed the ultimate prize. The entire night felt like a performance. Madelyn played her part, the adoring, supportive wife. She smiled, she nodded, she laughed at jokes that weren't funny. She watched Brendan work the room, his charisma, a tangible force field. He was magnetic, and she, in her current state, felt like a clunky piece of iron he was reluctantly dragging along. The dinner was a blur of tiny, artfully arranged food on oversized plates. Madelyn could barely eat her stomach, a tight knot of nerves. She could feel the sideways glances, the pitying smiles. Poor Madelyn. She's really let herself go. She could almost hear their thoughts. Brendan seemed oblivious, or more likely indifferent. He was holding court, his voice a confident baritone, as he discussed market caps and Series B funding. Then came the awards ceremony. Brendan's name was announced for Entrepreneur of the Year to thunderous applause. He kissed her on the cheek, a dry, papery peck, and strode onto the stage. He accepted the heavy crystal award, held it aloft, and beamed at the crowd. He gave a flawless speech thanking his investors, his team, and his mentors. He spoke of vision disruption and the relentless pursuit of innovation. He was everything they wanted him to be. Brilliant, charming, and humble enough to appear relatable. Madelyn felt a flicker of the pride she used to feel, a ghost of the woman who had fallen in love with his ambition and dazzling intellect. And then he turned his attention to her. And of course he began his tone shifting into something more intimate, more conspiratorial. "I have to thank my wife, Madelyn." A collective awe rippled through the audience. The spotlight operator, sensing a tender moment, swung a secondary beam onto their table, catching her in its unforgiving glare. Madelyn blinked, momentarily blinded. "She's been my biggest supporter," he continued, pausing for effect, "and my biggest project." A few nervous titters broke the silence. Madelyn's smile froze on her face. What did he mean by that? As you can all see, he went on gesturing towards her with a grand, sweeping motion of his hand. "We're expecting. It's been a transformative process for both of us." He chuckled, a smooth, practiced sound. "I've been learning all about strange cravings, mood swings, and the fact that a woman's body can expand in ways that defy physics." The laughter was louder this time, a mixture of shock and morbid amusement. Madelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't happening. He wouldn't do this. Not here. Not in front of everyone. But he was just getting started. I just hope he said, leaning into the microphone, his eyes twinkling with malice. The baby inherits her heart, and my everything else. The laughter exploded. It was a raw, guttural sound, the sound of a pack of hyenas tearing into a kill. It echoed off the high ceilings and crashed over Madelyn in waves of pure agony. He was mocking her body, her pregnancy, her very being. He had taken the most sacred experience of her life and turned it into a punchline for a room full of strangers. He had painted her as a hormonal, unattractive burden, a project he had to manage while he did the important work of changing the world. He hadn't just insulted her. He had publicly disowned her desirability, her intelligence, her partnership in their life, reducing her to a walking incubator with a good heart. Her vision tunneled. The faces in the crowd blurred into grotesque masks of mirth. She saw Marissa with her hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking with laughter. She saw Brendan's business partner, Liam, looking down at his plate, a faint flush of shame on his cheeks, but not daring to meet her eyes. Brendan was still talking, but the words were a meaningless buzz. All she could hear was the roaring in her ears. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished floor. The sound was jarring enough to momentarily silence the laughter. Every eye in the room was on her. Brendan stopped his speech, a look of feigned surprise on his face. "Madelyn, honey, you okay?" She couldn't speak. Words were useless against this tidal wave of humiliation. With as much dignity as she could muster, she turned and walked away. She didn't run. She walked her back straight, her head held high, even as she felt her entire world collapsing inward. She could feel the hundreds of pairs of eyes on her back, their pity and amusement like physical blows. She pushed through the heavy ballroom doors and didn't stop until she was outside in the cold, damp San Francisco night air. The fog swirled around her, a fitting shroud for the death of her marriage. She leaned against the cold stone wall of the hotel, wrapped her arms around her belly, and finally let the tears fall hot and silent. The laughter from the ballroom was a faint, mocking echo, but the wound it had carved into her soul was deafeningly loud. The taxi ride home was a silent, tear-streaked blur. The city lights smeared across the window like watercolors left out in the rain. Madelyn stared blankly, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, as if she could shield her unborn child from the ugliness of the world, from the cruelty of its own father. When she got back to their sterile, minimalist penthouse overlooking the bay, she went straight to the bedroom and stripped off the emerald silk dress. She let it pool on the floor like a shed skin and pulled on an old soft t-shirt and sweatpants. She looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, her eyes red and swollen, her face puffy. She saw what Brendan saw, not a beautiful pregnant woman, but a failure, a project. He arrived an hour later whistling. The sound was so jarringly normal, so utterly devoid of remorse, that it sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. He walked into the bedroom, loosening his bow tie. "There you are," he said, his voice light. "You caused quite a scene running out like that. People were asking if you were all right." Madelyn stared at him, her voice a hoarse whisper. "How could you, Brendan?" He finally looked at her, his expression shifting from casual indifference to one of mild irritation. "How could I? What, Madelyn? It was a joke. A little roast." Everyone was laughing. "You need to lighten up." A joke, she repeated the word, tasting like poison. "You humiliated me. You stood up in front of all those people, our friends, your colleagues, and you made a mockery of me and our baby." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," he scoffed, tossing his jacket onto a chair. "You're being overly sensitive. It's the hormones. Everyone knows pregnant women are emotional." It was his go-to weapon, gaslighting. Any valid emotion she had was dismissed as a symptom of her pregnancy. Her anger was hormones, her sadness was hormones, her intuition was hormones. He had been using it for months, slowly eroding her confidence, making her question her own sanity. "This has nothing to do with hormones," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "This has to do with you being a cruel, narcissistic bully. You used me to get a laugh, to make yourself look like the witty, charming guy who has to put up with his frumpy, pregnant wife." Brendan's face hardened. The charming mask slipped, revealing the cold steel beneath. "Frumpy? Is that what this is about? The fact that you've ballooned up? I'm trying to be supportive, Madelyn, but it's not easy when you've completely let yourself go. I was trying to make light of the situation, to own it." "Own it!" she cried, incredulous. "You think that was owning it? That was public shaming. You're hysterical," he said, turning his back on her to unbutton his shirt. "I'm not having this conversation. I just won the biggest award of my career, and you're trying to ruin it with your melodrama. Go to sleep. You'll feel better in the morning." And just like that, the conversation was over. He dismissed her pain as easily as he would flick away a piece of lint. He had already moved on. For him, the incident was closed. For Madelyn, it was a profound, soul-altering rupture. Something inside her, a small flame of hope that had flickered for months, was finally extinguished. The man she married was gone, replaced by this cold, cruel stranger. She didn't sleep in their bed that night. She took a blanket and curled up on the chaise lounge in the corner of the room, her back to him. She lay awake for hours, replaying his words, the sound of the laughter, the feeling of utter desolation. The love she had for him, once a vast and sheltering tree, was now a petrified forest, all dead wood and ash. The next morning, Brendan was gone before she woke up. He had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Have a big meeting with investors. Don't wait up." B, no apology, no acknowledgement of her pain, just business as usual. Numbly, she began to clean up from the night before, a futile attempt to impose order on her chaotic emotions. She picked up his tuxedo jacket from the chair where he'd thrown it. As she hung it up, something fell out of the inside pocket. It was a receipt. She bent down her swollen belly, making the movement awkward. It was from the Velvet Key, an absurdly expensive cocktail lounge in a boutique hotel across town. It was a place they had never been to together. It was too dark, too intimate, too much of a scene for their usual quiet dinners. The receipt was from last night. The timestamp was 1:15 a.m. He had come home around 2:00 a.m. The charge was for $98. 2 drinks, 2 very expensive drinks, the Serpent's Kiss and a 24-carat Negroni. She knew for a fact Brendan only ever drank single malt Scotch neat. A cold dread, sharp and distinct from the dull ache of her humiliation, began to creep up her spine. He hadn't come straight home after the gala. He had gone out for drinks, and he hadn't been drinking his usual. Her mind started racing. Who was he with Liam? No, Liam and his wife had left right after the awards. Some other colleagues. Maybe. But why lie about it by omission? Why not just say he'd gone for a celebratory drink with the team? She stood there in the silent, sun-drenched penthouse, the small, flimsy piece of paper in her hand, feeling as heavy as a stone tablet. It was nothing. It was probably nothing. A simple drink with a colleague. She was being paranoid. She was being emotional, hormonal. She heard Brendan's voice in her head, mocking her, dismissing her. But this time, another voice, a quieter, stronger one, pushed back. No, this was a fact, a piece of data, an anomaly in the carefully curated narrative of their lives. For the first time in a long time, Madelyn didn't dismiss her intuition. The public humiliation had shattered her complacency. The gaslighting had lost its power because the cruelty was now undeniable. She looked at the receipt again. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a thread. And with the methodical precision of the graphic designer she was, she decided she was going to pull on it and see what unraveled. The first crack in Brendan's perfect facade had appeared. The next few days were a masterclass in deception. On the surface, Madelyn played the part of the dutiful if slightly wounded wife. She made his coffee in the morning. She asked about his day. She allowed him to believe his gaslighting had worked, that she had accepted her role as the hormonal one and moved on. Brendan, basking in the glow of his award, was all too happy to accept this fiction. He was magnanimous occasionally, patting her belly and making bland comments about his little champion. But beneath the placid surface, a different Madelyn was emerging. She was a woman on a mission, fueled by a cold, righteous anger. Her design studio, a spare room filled with high-end computers and software, became her command center. For years, she had used her skills to create beautiful, clean aesthetics for corporate clients. Now she was using them to deconstruct her husband's life. She started with their shared finances, something she had long neglected, trusting Brendan completely. He had always told her not to worry her pretty little head about it. Now she worried. She logged into their joint credit card accounts, her heart pounding a steady, nervous rhythm. She scrolled through months of statements, the mundane charges painting a portrait of their life, groceries from Whole Foods, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, charges for her prenatal yoga classes. Then she found it. A charge from 3 weeks ago at a high-end jewelry store, Bijou de Luxe, for $4,500. The description was vague, custom piece. She frowned. It wasn't her birthday or their anniversary. He hadn't given her any jewelry. He had claimed a similar charge last year was for a custom watch for a key investor. He'd probably say the same thing this time. a client gift. But the amount felt too personal, too extravagant. She made a note of the date and the store. Her investigation moved to the digital realm. Brendan was a tech mogul, and his life was meticulously documented online. She started with social media. His public profiles were a curated feed of success photos of him on stage at board meetings on his sailboat. But she knew the real stories were often hidden in the tags and comments of others. She spent hours scrolling through Instagram, looking at photos from industry events, parties and conferences he had attended without her over the past few months. She searched for hashtags related to Innovate, to the Business Council Gala, to tech summits he'd spoken at. It was tedious, mind-numbing work. And then she saw her. Colette Dubois, Innovate's Chief Operating Officer. Colette was everything Madelyn currently was. Not sleek, sharp, and ambitious. She had an Ivy League MBA and a wardrobe of razor-sharp power suits. In every photo she was by Brendan's side, their body language seamless and familiar. They laughed at the same jokes, their heads tilted towards each other. They looked less like colleagues and more like a power couple. Madelyn had always dismissed her unease about Colette as professional jealousy, another one of her insecurities. Now she wasn't so sure. She clicked on Colette's profile. It was public. A stream of photos showcasing a glamorous life. Business class lounges, rooftop bars, charity galas. Madelyn scrolled back her eyes, scanning for anything out of place. She went back 3 weeks to the date of the jewelry store charge. And there it was. A photo Colette had posted of herself and a few colleagues at a celebratory dinner. The caption read, "Celebrating our new European expansion. Big things ahead." Innovate, #TechLife. In the photo, Colette was raising a glass of champagne, and on her slender wrist was a delicate, unique gold bracelet. It was a thin chain with a single abstract charm, like a stylized infinity loop, intertwined with a lightning bolt, the logo of Innovate. Madelyn's breath hitched. She zoomed in. The craftsmanship was exquisite. It wasn't a piece of company swag. It was fine jewelry, a custom piece. Her hands shaking, she opened a new browser tab and went to the website for Bijoux de Luxe. They showcased their custom design work. She scrolled through the gallery, her heart thudding in her chest. And there it was, listed under Corporate Commissions and Bespoke Gifts, a professional photograph of the exact same bracelet. The description read, 18K gold bracelet with custom-designed charm. A unique commission for a valued executive. The room felt suddenly cold. The client gift wasn't for a faceless investor. It was for Colette. A $4,500 bracelet. Brendan had lied. It was a small lie in the grand scheme of things, but it was concrete. It was proof. The cocktail receipt from the Velvet Key suddenly clicked into place. She went to the lounge's website and looked at their menu. There they were. The Serpent's Kiss, a gin and elderflower concoction served in a delicate coupe. The 24-carat Negroni, a high-end version of the classic garnished with gold leaf. One masculine, one feminine. They weren't his and Liam's drinks. They were his and Colette's. He hadn't gone home after humiliating his pregnant wife. He had gone to a dark, intimate bar to celebrate his victory with his COO, the woman wearing a $4,500 bracelet he had bought her with their joint funds. Madelyn leaned back in her chair, the cold reality washing over her. This wasn't just a flirtation. This was an affair. A long-running, calculated betrayal happening right under her nose while she was at home growing their child, believing in their future. The public mockery at the gala wasn't a random act of cruelty. It was a symptom of a much deeper disease. He wasn't just tired of her being pregnant. He was getting rid of her emotionally and socially to make room for someone else. She looked around the sterile penthouse at the life she had thought was hers. It was all a sham, a beautifully designed set for a play in which she was the fool. The grief was immense, a physical weight in her chest. But beneath the grief, the cold, hard anger began to crystallize into something new resolve. He thought she was a sensitive hormonal project he could manage and discard. He was about to find out how wrong he was. He had built his empire on data. She would use data to tear it down. The affair was the heart of the betrayal. But Madelyn's gut told her it was not the whole story. Brendan was not a man driven solely by passion. He was driven by ambition, and above all, money. An affair was messy, and Brendan hated messes. There had to be a larger, more calculated reason for his cruelty, a strategic motive behind his decision to alienate her so publicly. Her mind went to their prenuptial agreement. She had signed it without much thought 5 years ago, a hopelessly in love artist marrying a rising tech star. His lawyers had drafted it, and her own court-appointed counsel had given it a cursory glance, telling her it was fairly standard. Now, fairly standard sounded ominous. She found the document in their home, safe, tucked away in a folder labeled Marital Documents. Her hands trembled as she read through the dense legalese. Much of it was what she expected. Separate property remained separate, shared assets would be divided. But then she came to Article 4, Section B, the Infidelity Clause. It stated that in the event of proven marital infidelity by either party, the unfaithful party would forfeit their claim to 75% of the shared marital assets, in addition to paying a significant penalty sum directly to the aggrieved party. Madelyn remembered Brendan insisting on it, framing it as a testament to his commitment. "It keeps us both honest, babe," he'd said with a wink. "A guarantee of our fidelity." Now the clause looked like a weapon, and one that was pointed directly at him. If she could prove the affair with Colette, he stood to lose millions. The company Innovate, which he had founded after they were married, was their primary marital asset. Its last valuation was over $300 million. A divorce based on his infidelity would be financially catastrophic for him. Suddenly, his behavior made a terrifying kind of sense. The mockery at the gala, the constant gaslighting, the accusations of her being hormonal and hysterical. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a strategy. He was trying to provoke her. He wanted her to be the one to leave, to be the emotional, irrational wife who walked out. Perhaps he was trying to build a case that she was abandoning the marriage, or maybe he was trying to push her into an affair of her own, out of loneliness and spite. He was trying to void the very clause he had insisted upon. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was trying to cheat her out of her rightful share of their life's work. The audacity of it took her breath away. But it still felt incomplete. Even with the infidelity clause, a divorce would be a public relations nightmare. Brendan was obsessed with his image. Why would he risk it all? There had to be something more. Something bigger he was trying to protect. Her thoughts returned to her digital investigation. Brendan was careless. His arrogance was his Achilles heel. He believed she was technologically illiterate, someone who used her computer for arts and crafts. He had no idea she'd spent years mastering the intricate back-end of design software, that she understood file structures and metadata better than he did. They had a shared family cloud server for photos and documents. He mainly used it to dump old files he didn't want cluttering his personal laptop. He probably assumed she never looked at it. She logged in and began to sift through years of digital detritus. There were folders of vacation photos, old tax returns and scans of their passports. And then she found a folder cryptically labeled Project Nightingale. It was password protected. Her first dozen attempts failed their anniversary. His mother's maiden name, Innovate123. It was none of the obvious things. She leaned back, thinking. What was Brendan's true obsession? His ego? His legacy? She tried a combination of his own initials. BDH. Brendan, David Harrison. Oh, wait, the user said. No, Harrison. Let's change it. Brendan David. Price. BDP and the date. Innovate secured its first round of major funding. BDP 042099. Access granted. The folder contained dozens of documents, spreadsheets, legal papers, and encrypted email chains. It was a maze of corporate jargon she didn't understand. But she saw names of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. She saw complex wire transfer schedules moving vast sums of money between Innovate's corporate accounts and these offshore entities. It was more than just shady accounting. As she pieced it together, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Project Nightingale was a plan to systematically gut Innovate from the inside. Brendan and Colette were preparing for a massive new round of Series C funding. They were courting a huge venture capital firm, Westwood Capital. The documents suggested that once that funding, an estimated $150 million, was secured, they planned to declare a catastrophic, unforeseen data loss or security breach. They would then bankrupt the company, blame the failure on the breach, and disappear with the new investment money, which would have been funneled through the offshore accounts. They were going to fleece their investors, destroy the company they had built, and leave hundreds of employees jobless. The affair wasn't just a romance. It was a criminal conspiracy. Colette wasn't just the other woman. She was his partner in a massive fraud. And the baby. Madelyn's blood ran cold as she realized her role in his plan. A messy public divorce from a hysterical pregnant wife would be the perfect cover. It would provide him with a narrative of personal turmoil. He could claim the stress of his failing marriage caused him to take his eye off the ball at work, leading to the company's collapse. He would look like a tragic figure, a victim of circumstance, not a calculating thief. Her humiliation was not just a personal cruelty. It was a key part of his alibi. He wasn't trying to leave her with nothing. He was planning to leave everyone with nothing. She stared at the screen at the cold, hard proof of his monstrous plan. This had escalated far beyond a marital dispute. This was grand larceny. This was a federal crime. She knew with chilling certainty that she was in over her head. She couldn't fight this alone. Brendan was smart, ruthless, and had a team of high-powered lawyers on his payroll. If he even suspected she knew, he would bury her in legal motions, discredit her, and might even try to take the baby from her, painting her as an unstable mother. She needed an expert, a shark, someone who could look at the monster she had married and not even blink. She picked up her phone and Googled top divorce and financial fraud litigators in San Francisco. The first name that came up was a woman with a reputation for being brilliant, relentless, and terrifyingly effective, Ms. Anya Sharma. Madelyn copied the entire Project Nightingale folder onto a secure, encrypted hard drive. She deleted the browser history and cache, leaving no trace of her discovery. She picked up the phone and dialed Ms. Sharma's office. Yes, she said, her voice steady and clear, devoid of the tears and panic she felt inside. "I'd like to schedule a consultation. It's a matter of some urgency." This was the point of no return. The law offices of Sharma and Associates were located in a sleek skyscraper in the financial district, a world of polished glass and quiet, intimidating power. Madelyn felt small and out of place in her maternity dress, but she clutched the encrypted hard drive in her bag like a talisman. Anya Sharma was not what she had expected. She was a petite woman in her late 40s, with warm, intelligent eyes and a calm, reassuring demeanor that belied her reputation as a legal barracuda. She listened, truly listened, as Madelyn laid out the story. She didn't interrupt. She simply absorbed the details, her expression unreadable. Madelyn started with the gala, the public humiliation. She then detailed her digital investigation, the receipt, the bracelet, the affair with Colette. Finally, with her voice trembling slightly, she explained her discovery of Project Nightingale and the hard drive she had brought with her. When she finished, there was a long silence in the room. Ms. Sharma steepled her fingers, her gaze fixed on Madelyn. "Mrs. Price," she said. Finally, her voice calm, but with an underlying edge of steel. "What you have just described is not merely a divorce case. It is a potential criminal conspiracy involving wire fraud, securities, fraud and embezzlement. Your husband is not just an adulterer. He is a predator." For the first time since this ordeal began, Madelyn felt a surge of validation. She wasn't hormonal. She wasn't crazy. The monster was real. "What he did to you at that gala," Ms. Sharma continued, her eyes flashing with anger, "was unconscionable. But it was also a critical mistake. His arrogance made him underestimate you. He saw you as a prop. That is an error we will make him pay for dearly." Over the next 2 weeks, Miss Sharma's office became Madelyn's new command center. Anya assembled a small, formidable team. There was a forensic accountant named Robert, a gray-haired man who could find a single misplaced dollar in a mountain of financial data, and a cybersecurity expert named Kenji, a young genius who could navigate the darkest corners of the digital world. Their first task was to verify the contents of the hard drive and build an unshakable case. Kenji decrypted the email chains between Brendan and Colette. They were chillingly professional. They discussed the offshore accounts, the timing of the wire transfers, and the specifics of the catastrophic breach they planned to stage. They even had a code name for Madelyn, the asset, as in the asset to be managed and eventually liquidated. Reading the cold, detached way they discussed her future and the future of their child made her physically ill. Robert, the accountant, dove into the labyrinth of shell corporations. He worked backward from the Cayman Island accounts, tracing the flow of money. He discovered that Brendan had already siphoned off nearly $20 million of Innovate's legitimate profits over the past 18 months, bleeding the company dry while putting on a face of explosive growth. He was inflating the company's value to secure the new funding, all while secretly gutting its foundations. "He's not just building a lifeboat," Robert explained, pointing to a complex flow chart on a monitor. "He's building a super yacht, and he's using planks. He's tearing from the ship everyone else is on." While they built the financial case, Ms. Sharma also hired a discreet private investigator, a former federal agent named Frank. His job was to get irrefutable proof of the affair. Brendan and Colette were clever. They rarely met in public places. But Frank was better. He staked out the underground garage of Colette's apartment building. After 3 days, he hit the jackpot. He captured crystal-clear surveillance photos of Brendan's car arriving late at night and not leaving until the early morning. He also got photographs of them at a secluded coastal hotel a month prior, a business strategy retreat that no one else from Innovate had attended. The photos showed them holding hands on the beach, kissing over dinner. It was undeniable. As the pieces of evidence mounted, Madelyn felt a profound transformation within herself. The hurt and humiliation were still there, but they were now overlaid with a cold, hard resolve. She was no longer just a victim. She was an active participant in the fight for justice. She worked alongside the team, using her designer's eye for detail to spot inconsistencies in photo timelines and her intimate knowledge of Brendan's habits to predict his moves. He has a major press conference scheduled in 2 weeks, Madelyn told the team one afternoon. It's the official announcement of the new Innovate headquarters. The mayor will be there, and so will the leadership team from Westwood Capital, the VC firm he's been courting. He's going to use the event to finalize the Series C funding. Anya Sharma smiled a slow, dangerous smile. A public event, she mused. He chose a public stage for your humiliation. It seems only fitting that we choose a public stage for his reckoning. The plan began to form. It was audacious, dramatic, and incredibly risky. It wasn't enough to file for divorce quietly and hand the evidence to the authorities. That would allow Brendan to control the narrative, to paint himself as a victim of a vengeful wife. No. The truth had to come out in a way that was spectacular and undeniable. He had tried to destroy her reputation in a room full of people. She would dismantle his entire empire in front of the world. They had 2 weeks to prepare. Kenji worked on a presentation, a devastating slideshow that would lay out the entire conspiracy, complete with emails, bank statements, and Frank's surveillance photos. Ms. Sharma prepared the legal filings, ready to be submitted to the court and the SEC the moment the presentation went live. Madelyn's role was the most difficult. She had to continue the charade, to live in the same house as the man who had plotted her ruin, and act as if nothing was wrong. Every evening when Brendan came home, she would smile, ask about his day, and rub her belly. She played the part of the placid, slightly dim, hormonal wife to perfection. It was the hardest performance of her life, and the most important. She was forging a sword, and with every passing day, its edge grew sharper. She was no longer Brendan Price's project. She was his judge, his jury, and soon she would be his executioner. The day of the press conference was bright and clear, the kind of deceptively beautiful San Francisco day that masks a biting wind. The event was held at the construction site for the future Innovate campus, a massive project meant to symbolize the company's permanence and success. A large, elegant tent had been erected, filled with journalists, city officials, investors, and Innovate employees. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Madelyn had told Brendan she was feeling unwell and would stay home, a story he readily accepted. It suited him to have his blooming wife out of the public eye. What he didn't know was that Madelyn, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue maternity dress that radiated quiet confidence, was sitting in a black SUV a block away with Anya Sharma. "Are you ready for this?" Anya asked, her hand resting reassuringly on Madelyn's arm. Madelyn took a deep breath, her hand on her belly. The baby kicked a small, strong flutter. "He started this," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm going to finish it." Inside the tent, Brendan took the stage to a roar of applause. He was in his element, a master showman. He stood at a sleek podium, a massive digital screen behind him, displaying the Innovate logo. He looked confident, powerful a king, in his court. He began his speech, his voice resonating with passion and vision. "Today is not just about a building of glass and steel," he boomed. "It's about building the future. Innovate is more than a company. It's a promise of a smarter, more connected world." In the front row, Colette Dubois watched him, a look of pure adoration on her face. Beside her sat the partners from Westwood Capital, their expressions a mixture of admiration and avarice. They were ready to sign the check. Back in the SUV, Kenji, the tech expert, sat in the front seat with a laptop. "We're in," he whispered. He had found a back door into the event's AV system network. "I have control of the main screen. On your signal, Madelyn." Madelyn watched the live stream on a tablet. She watched Brendan spin his web of lies, his charisma holding the audience captive. He was a snake charmer, and they were all mesmerized. She waited until he reached the crescendo of his speech, and with the incredible support of our partners, especially the visionary team at Westwood Capital, Brendan declared, gesturing to them, "We are about to enter a new era of growth and innovation. The future is bright. Now." Madelyn said, her voice like ice, "Do it now." On stage, Brendan clicked his remote to advance to the next slide, a glamorous rendering of the new headquarters. But that's not what appeared on the giant screen behind him. Instead, the screen flickered and was replaced by a high-resolution surveillance photo of him and Colette kissing on the balcony of the Coastal Hotel. The image was 20 feet high, their infidelity broadcast for the entire world. On the world it was about to see. A collective gasp swept through the tent. Brendan froze, his smile locked on his face as a wave of confusion washed over him. He stared at the screen, his mind unable to process what was happening. He fumbled with the remote, clicking it frantically, but the image remained. Then the slideshow advanced. The next image was a copy of the receipt from Bijou Deluxe for 4,500 soms. It was followed by the photo from Colette's Instagram, with the custom Innovate bracelet clearly visible on her wrist. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder, turning into a roar of shock and speculation. Brendan's face had gone pale. He turned to the AV booth at the back, his expression a mask of fury. "Turn it off! Shut it down!" he screamed into the microphone, his polished composure shattering. But the slideshow continued, a relentless, methodical demolition of his life. A screenshot of the bank transfer to the Cayman Islands Shell Corporation appeared, followed by an excerpt from his encrypted email to Colette. "Once the Westwood funds are in, Nightingale takes flight. Prepare for asset liquidation." The partners from Westwood Capital stared at the screen, their faces turning from admiration to stony rage. They looked at Colette, who looked as if she had been turned to stone, her face a deathly white. And then Madelyn made her entrance. The doors at the back of the tent opened, and she walked in. She moved slowly, deliberately, her pregnant form a symbol of everything he had betrayed. The crowd parted for her, like the Red Sea. A hush fell over the tent, a silence so profound it was almost deafening. All eyes were on her as she walked down the central aisle, her gaze locked on her husband. She stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at the man who had tried to destroy her. He looked pathetic, small and utterly broken, bathed in the light of his own crimes. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice, clear and strong, carried through the silent tent. "Hello, Brendan," she said. He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. "You said you hoped our baby would inherit my heart, and your everything else. she continued, her voice ringing with the power of the truth. But looking at this evidence, at the lies, the theft, the betrayal, I have to say, I pray this child inherits nothing from you. The final image appeared on the screen behind him. It was a simple, stark title card, designed by Madelyn herself. It read, "Project Nightingale, a study in fraud. Evidence submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the U.S. Attorney's Office." It was over. The game was up. The investors were on their feet, shouting. Journalists were scrambling cameras, flashing, capturing the spectacular implosion of the golden boy of Silicon Valley. Two men in dark suits, who had been standing discreetly at the back, began to make their way toward the stage. Federal agents. Brendan finally looked away from the screen, his eyes finding Madelyn's. In them, she saw no remorse, no regret, only pure, unadulterated hatred for the woman who had outsmarted him. The project had overthrown its creator. Madelyn simply held his gaze, her expression not of triumph, but of a deep, sorrowful finality. Then she turned her back on him, on the chaos, on the smoldering ruins of their life together, and walked out of the tent, leaving him to face the justice he so richly deserved. She had stepped into the fire of his making and had emerged not burned, but forged anew. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The story of Brendan Price's dramatic downfall was front-page news for weeks. Innovate Gate, the media called it. The tech world, which had celebrated his genius, now reveled in his disgrace. He and Colette Dubois were arrested at the press conference, led away in handcuffs as cameras flashed. The images were a stark contrast to the polished, successful personas they had so carefully crafted. The legal battle was swift and brutal. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence Madelyn and her team had compiled, Brendan and Colette had no choice but to plead guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, securities, fraud, and conspiracy. Brendan's attempts to blame Colette and Colette's attempts to paint herself as a victim of his manipulation fell flat. The emails proved they were equal partners in the crime. They were both sentenced to significant prison terms. For the investors and employees of Innovate, it was a devastating blow. The company collapsed, its assets frozen, and its reputation in tatters. But Madelyn's actions had prevented a much larger catastrophe. By exposing the fraud before the Series C funding went through, she had saved Westwood Capital from a $150 million loss. As a gesture of gratitude, and as part of a civil settlement, the firm awarded her a substantial whistleblower fee, recognizing that her courage had protected them and the wider investment community. Madelyn's divorce was finalized quickly. The infidelity clause was enacted, and combined with the settlement, it left her financially secure. But she had no interest in Brendan's blood money. She worked with Ms. Sharma and a team of lawyers to establish a trust fund for the laid-off Innovate employees, helping to provide a safety net for the innocent people whose livelihoods her husband had been willing to sacrifice. 6 weeks after Brendan's public reckoning, Madelyn gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Sophie, which means wisdom. As she held her daughter for the first time, looking into her tiny, trusting face, Madelyn felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. All the anger, the pain, the betrayal. It all seemed to fade away, replaced by an overwhelming wave of love and purpose. This tiny human was her future, her real legacy. The ensuing months were about rebuilding not on the fractured foundations of her old life, but on new, solid ground of her own making. She sold the cold, minimalist penthouse and bought a warm, light-filled house in a quiet neighborhood with a garden. She traded a life of galas and empty praise for one of community and genuine connection. Her friend Phoebe was a constant source of support, a doting auntie to baby Sophie. With a portion of her settlement, Madelyn started her own business, a boutique graphic design and branding agency. She called it Clarity Design. The name was a reflection of her new life philosophy. Her first clients were small women-owned businesses, startups built on passion and integrity rather than ego and greed. Her work was fulfilling, and for the first time she felt her professional and personal values were in perfect alignment. She rarely thought of Brendan. He was a ghost, a character from a different life, a story she would one day have to tell her daughter. But it wouldn't be a story of victimhood. It would be a story of resilience. It would be the story of a woman who was underestimated, publicly shamed, and pushed to her breaking point. A woman who, instead of breaking, found an inner strength she never knew she possessed. She learned that true power wasn't about public acclaim or financial success. It was about living in your truth, protecting those you love, and having the courage to build a new future from the ashes of the past. One sunny afternoon, Madelyn sat in her garden, Sophie sleeping peacefully in her arms. The air smelled of jasmine and freshly cut grass. She looked at her daughter's face, a perfect blend of features, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Brendan had hoped the baby would inherit his everything else. But looking at Sophie, Madelyn knew the truth. Her daughter had inherited the only thing that mattered, a heart full of strength, a spirit full of promise, and a mother who would ensure she grew up knowing her infinite, undeniable worth. Madelyn's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often unearth our greatest strengths. When faced with public humiliation and private deceit, she refused to be a victim. She transformed her pain into purpose, her eye for detail into a weapon for justice, and her quiet resilience into a force that brought down an empire of lies. Her journey shows us that true empowerment comes not from the life others build for you, but from the one you have the courage to build for yourself, brick by honest brick. It reminds us that underestimating the quiet ones is always a mistake, because their strength, once awakened, can change everything. What do you think about Madelyn's incredible transformation? Could you have found the strength to do what she did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If her story of resilience and justice moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will inspire and empower you.